Alright, welcome back to Questing Beast. I'm Ben, and today we're looking at this review copy I was sent of Hot Springs Island, which is a 2-book hexcrawl adventure written by Jacob Hurst. So, as I said, this is 2 books. One is designed for the players of the campaign, and one is designed for the game master. The player's guide is called A Field Guide to Hot Springs Island, and the other one is called The Dark of Hot Springs. Let's look at this one first, and then we'll look at the other and see what this has to offer. So first of all, I think the idea of having it broken into 2 books is a really fantastic idea. This book here is designed to be an in-world artifact, meaning that once the players arrive on the island, you can, for example, have them just pick this off the beach. Maybe there's another crash survivor who had this on them, and you can simply tell a player, you find this on the beach. And it contains in-world descriptions of the island and what explorers know about the place so far. It contains information that may be accurate, may be inaccurate. It's hard to tell. Players will have to piece it together. But by looking through this book, it can help guide their actions and help them make informed choices, which I think is a really fantastic idea for getting players involved in the world and thinking about it from an actual explorer's perspective. So, fantastic book construction to start off with. This thing is just beautiful looking. It has this kind of faux leather edge to it, gold foil printing on the spine. This nice cloth cover here, and then right off on the inside we have this beautiful map of Hot Springs Island. And I should point out that Hot Springs Island is part of an archipelago called the Swordfish Islands. This is only one of the islands. Hopefully we'll see more books giving more details about other islands as we go on, but the focus on Hot Springs Island should give you more than enough fuel for a campaign for many sessions, as we'll see in the next book. Here are all the hexes that you can travel. The hexes are 2 miles wide, meaning this island is fairly small by hexcrawl standards, but it is very dense. We have a nice page over here where you can label where major locations are that you've discovered, with some of them filled in already, meaning that players right away have an incentive to go to certain places. I think that's really cool. The whole thing is written by Jacob Hurst and mostly illustrated by Gabriel Hernandez with some really great illustrations. It's all done in this very sketchy pencil style, which evokes the concept art that you see for fantasy or sci-fi movies. And I think that sort of sketchy concept art style can work really well at evoking imagery rather than being very precise about things. And that works especially well for a field guide like this, which is supposed to be from the perspective of people who have actually been to the island. So their impressions of it aren't very precise. They're kind of inexact. I should point out that the content of the book is geared more towards adults than at teenagers. So unlike Wizards of the Coast, it's more free with adult language, adult situations, nudity, and so on. So fair warning with that. It's not as extreme as some stuff that you might see in Lamentations of the Flame Princess, but definitely geared more towards adults than at kids. It starts off with this fantastic journal, which I was actually really engrossed in. Normally, I don't like bits of fiction stuck in my RPGs, but this was a welcome change to that. Most of the fiction that I found in this and in The Dark of Hot Springs Island was really engrossing, and I found it just really interesting to read. It gives a lot of great impressions of the things you might find on the island, but from a more inexact perspective. What was the experience of being like on the island? By reading through these stories, you get a sense of what an adventure there would be like. What sort of things would you run into? What is the tone like? What types of monsters are there? And that does a great job in letting people know what to expect. Lots of different characters. We have some things like the Elven alphabet that you can use if you're showing players things that they find. The Ancients alphabet. Herbal. Now this is really cool. In this book, there is a strong emphasis on the actual flora of the island. So that's something you rarely see in RPGs, where lots of detail is put into what the different plants look like and the specific properties of each plant. So the plants are almost like a bestiary in itself, or they're not just decorative. They all have specific uses or dangers that could be harnessed by the players. That works really well for a jungle setting like this one, where the entire world around them could be useful or deadly depending on how it's used. And all of these are really interesting. Ember coral, flint moss, or type of moss that's highly flammable, so you can cause explosions with it. Jelly moss, which hardens when smeared on wood, so you can use it as a type of glue. We have these giant pitcher plants. We have quickweed, which grows so quickly that over time you can actually see it spreading around the island. Zapopo, which can be refined into a drug. Shadow lilies, which are invisible for the most part. So you can only really pick them when you're not looking at them or when you're not aware that they're there. And these all have useful things. You could either be used as part of a magical artifact or a potion, or in some of the cases, they could be weaponized. Bestiary, again, no stats with any of these. I should point out that this entire system, or this entire pair of books, is system neutral. In fact, it's game neutral. There are no stats of any kind, and you could easily adapt it to any fantasy RPG that you would want to. Now, there are some advantages and disadvantages to that. I mean, most of the monsters are straightforward enough that in any competent monster manual, you would be able to find equivalent stats, so that wouldn't be a big deal. But in many cases, it may involve just kind of ad-libbing what their stats are. But it's usually not too much of a problem. We have some standard monsters, but also some really interesting ones. Giant centipedes, copperbacks. Things are described in a good amount of detail, though more detail can be found in The Dark of Hot Springs Island, the other book, than in this one. But when players use this information to make decisions, it's really up to the GM how accurate this information is. Flay fiends, Kuji birds, muttering serpents. This is a great one. This one also showed up in the Lapis Observatory, which was kind of a preview module of the Hot Springs Island. So this is a monster that always looks like you whenever you're looking at it, which is kind of a terrifying idea. Obsidian diggers, orange sludges, lots of different types of poison dart frogs, giant rats, shadows, singing golems, and so on. Lots of very tropical, poisonous, and deadly creatures. The feel of Hot Springs Island is one of savagery and elementalism. And that is really brought home with the types of creatures and plants that are available. We have an overview of the different types of elements. There's a lot of elementals in Hot Springs Island. In fact, the whole setting has strong ties to planes outside of the material plane. Especially once we get to the Dark, I'll talk about some of those things. There's a lot of other factions that have interests in the Hot Springs Island, which can easily allow you to tie in an extra planar campaign if you would want to. Fire imps, water imps, magma, and steam are the main forces at work. And then we have some of the main factions available on the island that are known by adventurers. I should point out that adventurers mostly come to the island through something called the Martell Company, which is basically like a fantasy version of the East India Company. They're exploring these islands to exploit them and to get gold out of them. And they're sending adventurers there to scope things out. So we have the Night Axe, which are a group of ogres. Different types of Night Axe. We have lizard men of several different varieties. We have Zvarku and the Fuego Knots. Zvarku is a Efreet. And Fuego Knots are his band of fire-related minions. The exact motivations of all these factions aren't immediately clear to the players, although they are hinted at. More detail is going to have to be found through actually exploring and interacting with all of these beings. Obsidian is a common theme throughout as well. We have the Nereids, which are part of the water faction. And we have another journal entry at the end. Again, beautiful illustrations. These maps do a great job of really showing you the terrain and what the lay of the land looks like. So it wouldn't be possible for players to read this whole thing at the table. However, what I would probably do is start them off with a quick introductory adventure, perhaps right after they crash on the island, and then in between sessions, really encourage them to trade this book back and forth and read through it and get ideas for what they want to do next. They don't have to read it all at once, but as they pour through it, they'll get inspiration. And this is really fantastic. Here's a cool thing at the end. So trade. There's lots of different types of monsters on the island, and there's lots of factions, and the factions are often interested in parts of the monsters. So this highly incentivizes players to hunt monsters and take their body parts and sell them, which is something I haven't seen really fleshed out in most RPGs. So this takes, for example, a creature, for example, the singing golem, and then the useful parts, maybe chimes or statue pieces, and then the X tells you which factions are interested in it. So your alliances with different factions can prove very monetarily important if you know what they want and if you're good at hunting. That's really cool. All right, let's look at the other book. Again, it has a nice bookmark here. Beautiful construction. There's no cracking of the binding when I was opening it. It feels very solid and well produced. So this is the GM book, The Dark of Hot Springs Island. And I'll try and get the light to shine on it. You can see there's that skull imagery there impressed into the faux leather. And down here you can see the dark of Hot Springs Island kind of emerges from the darkness of the leather. That is really cool. Same deal with the gold foil stamped binding and this solid black back. It's a great artifact to just hold in your hands and have at the table. It feels dangerous. It feels mysterious. It really evokes the feeling that I think the author is trying to get across. And that is really cool. I also love how big it is. You don't find a lot of RPGs. Well, you find some mainstream ones being produced this big. Like this is a normal 5th edition D&D size book. But most indie RPGs are done more at a smaller scale. And this book actually makes use of the full double-sided spreads that I see very few books actually doing. I'll show you what I mean by that once I get into it. This book actually uses its real estate productively. So one little complaint right off the bat, I'm not crazy about the font choice. I think Futura is being used here. And the only reason I can think of using Futura is because the old AD&D books use that font. So there's a nostalgia factor there. However, it's not the most readable font in the world. And I would have preferred something similar to what was in the field guide. So that's one complaint. But right off the bat, it starts off with explaining what type of sandbox campaign this is. It's a sandbox of black powder. So this book does an amazing job with presenting you with precarious situations. So it's a very situation-based type of module. There isn't a storyline. What it does is it presents you with lots of factions who all want things from each other, who are all allied or antagonists with one another. And there's lots of elements within the island that could easily disrupt the status quo. Everything is delicately balanced, and the players being thrown into this are going to unbalance it, and things are going to go haywire, things are going to go sideways, and you as the GM is going to have to adapt to that. But that's going to inherently create story-like situations just based on how the players interact with the world. That's wonderful, and that is really taking a lot of the best advice on how to create sandboxes to heart and making it easy for the players to run. As I was reading it, I kept finding these little connections between other parts of the book. Everything is heavily interconnected. So pulling on one strand is going to pull everything else. One thing I worry about is keeping track of it all, but I bet it wouldn't be too difficult, especially if you just focused on the elements that players have interacted with. It starts off with an example expedition, which is really fantastic because there's procedural elements to this. There are rules for how you travel from hex to hex, rules for how you explore things, and rules for generating the content that's there. So it's wonderful that we actually have an explanation of that. It's all done over this 2-page spread. And then it shows you how to generate a dungeon over this 2-page spread. Dungeons tend to look like this. They have these large, big, fat numbers keying the different sections. And then you're recommended to generate an encounter for each of those numbers. That seems very dense to me. That means there's going to be a lot of things to run into in each dungeon-like area. Of course, you can tone that down by adding more or less of those if you wanted to. However, my experience of a lot of these dungeons is that there isn't a lot of tricks or traps to them. Most of the interest comes from the encounters that you roll for them. So it's a very interactive setting. They also have what's happening. So every time you encounter a dungeon, there's going to be a new main thing happening there. There's a difference to the status quo that's going to shake things up every time that you play. The same goes for traveling from hex to hex. Whenever you go to a new hex, you have to roll up an encounter for it. And it always works on a 3d6 table, which creates this bell curve, meaning that the author can create encounters that are more likely and ones that are less likely. That means that each hex has a standard feel to it that can deviate from that. So as players travel around, they're going to be able to get a sense for what that area is like based on the types of encounters that they tend to find there. That creates a very realistic feel to it. It creates a consistency to the island that makes it also feel more alive when things deviate from that. It's a great balancing act. General facts about the island. It's invisible to extraplanar creatures. Primal, black sand beaches. Nobody likes the elves. The elves were horrible people who basically messed up everything. Ma Martell runs the Martell Company, and you probably work for them. It's an adventurers guild. There's the Efreet on the island is mining red crystal, which is incredibly valuable for extraplanar markets. So that's one of the main connections to the multiverse. So here's general rules for travel and exploration. You have your map of the island with everything keyed here. You have rules for traveling. Everything is done in watches, which is sections of 4 hours. It recommends that you use poker chips in order to track which 4-hour watch you're in. But it's a great division of time. It allows you to move quickly through the island, and whether you choose to move to the next hex or explore there or do something else with your time. It's an easy way to keep track of stuff. And here's something really fantastic. We have much more detailed explanations of each hex further on in the book, but we have a 2-page spread here that gives you a 1-line key for every hex, making it very easy to reference what's in each spot. And here is really the meat of the book. This is kind of the engine that drives all of the encounters. It's the encounter table. So on this, you can roll, figure out where they are, the type of terrain, whether it's heavy jungle, mountains and jungle, volcanoes, volcanic, or so on. And then then you roll on that to figure out what type of thing is there. For example, you might roll elementals if you're in a volcano area. Then you go to the elemental table, and then you can roll there to see what you find. Right? So volcano, elementals, you would roll on that table there. So using this little engine, you can generate who is there and how many of them are there. This is a little bit time consuming, and the author does admit that it can be time consuming. So one solution to that is to roll up a bunch of these ahead of time so that you're prepared before the game starts. But there is also an online, well, it's not an online, but it's a digital roller that has a map of the island, and you can simply click on each tile and it will roll automatic encounters for you. If I can find a copy of that, I'll put it down in the description below. I tested it out. It was really fantastic, and I need to go find that again. Really speeds things up. Although rolling all of the encounters for a dungeon, I don't think there's an online roller for that or a digital roller for that. So you may have to work that on your own. So when players actually visit a dungeon, you may have to take a short 15-minute break and then roll up encounters for it before you throw players back in. That's just the way it goes. Start off with our hex key. Like I said before, the design of this book is very, very intentional. In fact, the only thing that I can think of that I could really compare this book to is Maze of the Blue Medusa in terms of its attention to not only book quality, but also how each page is laid out and how much the author cares about the design of the book and making it easier for you to run it. So for example, every single hex gets 1 page. Not more, not less, exactly 1 page. Each hex has 3 encounters on it. The first encounter is locations. The first location is always the one that you run into first. And then if players want to dig deeper into that hex, you look at one of the other locations. So you only need to look at 1 page at a time, and it's all right there. The only thing design-wise that I thought could really be improved was maybe different typography. And also, I would have put the encounter tables right here. I would have put them right at this end of the book so you could easily flip to them whenever you needed to. That's a little bit of a nitpick, though. So each of these has a sort of shortened version of the table that you would need, and so that you can quickly reference it. It doesn't have all of the information, but it has the stuff that you would normally use, and it reproduces where that hex is on the island to immediately know what hexes are surrounding it in case players wander off. They're all full of great illustrations. They're all extremely easy to read. They're all broken down into one section, which is stuff that the players would immediately notice, and a section called the dark, which is the stuff that the GM would notice and that you can reveal to them if they poke around. So there's one for every one of the 25 hexes, meaning there's a total of 75 separate distinct locations that they could encounter. After that section, we come to the section that goes into mostly the dungeons, the maps and events that they're going to run into. And there's a nice design to the book where there's little tabs on the side there, as you can see. It allows you to flip to these very quickly. The design of the dungeons or locations are all very neat, very easy to read, and there's a wide variety of them. You have everything from dire boar dens to villages. And similar to my review of the Lapis Observatory, which I did previously, every single one of these locations is done in this really great format where there's going to be stuff that's in bold, and the stuff in bold is the things that you immediately notice, so that you can, if they visit that area, you can just scan this and point out the bold things to say what they notice. But then if they examine them more carefully, there's like these little tags in a parentheses that give you more detailed descriptions of it. So the whole design of this enables you to pull out the important information very quickly. So you don't have to scan through long, clunky paragraphs to figure out what's important. You can immediately scan it and pull it out. I really wish many more books designed their descriptions like that. Slave quarters. Every once in a while, we'll have a description of a major antagonist or a major monster that's unique. You have this fantastic volcanic lair inside a volcano where the Efreet lives. The book manages to veer between being quite scary and dangerous and being funny and very tongue-in-cheek, which I appreciate. Let's see if I can find the description. This Efreet guy, how does it describe it? Bro, you don't even know how fresh to death Svarku's volcanic lair is. So it's described like it's a drug dealer's pimped out crib, basically, with an insane amount of wealth and gold and opulence everywhere. And that sort of speaks to the psychology of this Efreet as well, that his internal thought process is kind of manifested in the way that he overdoes things trying to impress people and trying to get everyone, including adventurers, to like him and ally with him. There are so many great little touches throughout the book that allow you to process it more easily and to relate this weird fantastical stuff to tropes that you've seen just in day-to-day life in our world or from other forms of media in the real world, which makes it a lot easier to run. So we've got some mines of various types, an aquifer, some more major monsters, and so on. We have the Lapis Observatory, which I've already reviewed previously. That's a several leveled dungeon, or tower, really. And we have Hot Springs City, which is a huge destroyed elven city because the elven civilization is gone, with rules for city crawling with tons of different types of locations you can easily generate on this table over here, and happenings for day and night. So here we have this very detailed drawing of what the city would look like. So you can actually show them it and ask them where they're going. We have a temple. Let's flip ahead a little bit. We have factions. So there are several main factions here, and they are all interrelated. They all have something to say about one another. They all have unique drives and motivations. So being able to play factions off one another and use them to your advantage is going to be a big part of surviving on Hot Springs Island. So we have the Fuegonauts, run by Svarku. And there's like these long descriptions of their backstory. And like I said before, this was surprisingly entertaining. I normally don't like reading these sort of detailed yada, 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 tell me about the backstory of your homebrew world sort of thing. But I found this really engrossing. A lot of it was funny and fascinating and just great as like little bits of fiction. Very pleasantly surprised by that. It implies this whole corner of the D&D universe that you don't normally encounter. And it's sort of assumed to be in a D&D-like universe, even though it's technically system neutral. The Nereids, and this is a great story of love and adventure and danger across the multiverse. And it gives you a great sense of what the extraplanar factions think about Hot Springs Island and their connections to it. There's a deep amount of backstory to this world that explains why the island is the way it is. Although players aren't going to immediately know any of that, it's all relevant. So there isn't a lot of just useless backstory that's never going to come into play. All of it could be very important if players trigger the right thing or uncover the right secret. All of this could come into play. So it's useful to read and entertaining. The Night Axe, which seem like just savage ogres who are just going to cut your head off, but like most of the factions, there's a twist on them where they're not what they seem at all, and they actually have very compelling motivations. Along with a unique culture that's easy to grok and easy to run. We have a detailed description of how elementals work. Again, a good example of page layout where each imp gets one column, so it's very easy to read. We have how the lizard men work, details on the elves, who are the bad guys, I suppose, of the faction, even though they're not there anymore. Their evil has influenced everything on the island. And a number of the other factions and cults that you might find there. The appendix is especially interesting, as it goes into mostly treasure. And unlike other books where the treasure is just piles of this type of coin and jewels, one of the principles of Hot Springs Island is that there is gold everywhere. It was run by elves who were incredibly wealthy and decadent, so gold is just plastered to everything. The question is, how are you going to get all that gold off the island if you're doing a gold for XP sort of thing? And if you get it off the island, how is that going to inflate the gold market if they suddenly have massive amounts of gold pouring into the economy? But more importantly, the treasure is not really described as gold at all. You can just give that to players whenever you want and just have that run its own course in terms of the problems that are associated with it. But rather, the treasures listed are these. There is a good 300 unique treasures listed, each of which is usually a magical artifact of some kind. And most of them, for the most part, have advantages and disadvantages. So they are precarious, like the rest of the island. For example, we have a pickpocket's hand, which is attached to a 10-foot braided leather cord. If not kept in a dark place, the hand attempts to pickpockets as if it were a high-level thief. If treated well and given an opportunity to pickpockets frequently, the hand can be trained to work mostly on command after D4 weeks. It's a great example. They're all strange and quirky and possibly very useful if you play your cards right. And there's 300 of them. That is just an amazing glut of awesomeness. You could steal this for any RPG campaign. These are all just fantastic. They also give a great sense of the culture that produced them. Just by reading through them, you can get a clear idea of who were these people, what did they value. Elven treasures, lizardmen treasures. And then near the end, we have non-player characters. So each NPC has a short one-paragraph write-up and sometimes an illustration as well. And these are mostly adventurers that you can run into, because more adventurers than just your party are making their way to this island searching for its secrets and treasure. And to this book's credit, each one of these NPCs is done in a short style, but very vivid. Each one is distinct, that you can get a clear picture of what they look like, what they want, and how they would act, just from this paragraph. It doesn't waste your time with useless details. And we have rumors of elven ruins. You're wandering into the ruins, you get 100 different rumors of things you might find there. We have a quick overview of all of the plants again. If you don't have the player's guide with you, you can look through this. So if players run into a plant, you know what it does. Same thing with all the different types of monsters that they can encounter. And there you go. So these two books are quite extraordinary in their mind. It's the first example that I've seen of a hexcrawl that I would actually feel tempted to run. Mostly because of how much care has been put into making it easy to run, making all of the elements of it very clear, making the descriptions clear, and making everything tightly linked together so that when they run into something in a place, it's going to matter in the long term. It also has enormous replayability due to the fact that every time you go to a location again, you can roll on these tables and you will generally know what's going to be there because there's more likely encounters, but every once in a while you'll be surprised by things that you weren't expecting. So by putting these things together, the GM is going to be able to organically create a campaign. Because when you encounter a dungeon for the first time, you're going to roll up some encounters for the different things in it, and sometimes they'll make sense, sometimes they won't, but in most cases, you're going to be able to look at them all and say, okay, why are all of those things there? Why would there be some Fuegonauts over here and some Nereids over here? And would they be in conflict with each other? Oh wait, there's this type of person over here as well. And I also rolled up a motivation for him, so I know why he's there. And you can start putting together this network of actions and motivations. So it's going to kind of write itself, although as a GM you can tweak it a little bit. It's going to provide constant inspiration and variety as you travel around the island, which is going to make it both feel consistent and surprising at the same time. All in all, it's an amazing package. It's something completely unique and something I haven't seen before. So I'm going to strongly recommend Hot Springs Island. I'm going to put the links down in the description below if you want to check it out. Like I said, similar to Maze of Blue Medusa in many ways in terms of its extremely high production values. So if you're looking to get it in hard copy, I would do so quickly since I don't know how long it's going to be in print. But fantastic book. Anyway, that's it for my review for today. Thanks for watching, everybody. Please make sure to subscribe to my channel if you would like to see other RPG reviews like this one. You can also join me on Patreon if you want to support me making videos like this. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys later.